Dear Excellencies, dear friends, dear panelists, dear ladies and gentlemen, and dear guests. It is a particular honor at this occasion to address this panel on the occasion of the 30 years of membership of the Republic of North Macedonia to the United Nations. When I see this table, then the table speaks for itself. We have one of the persons, the first to my left, who was part of the writing of our constitution. Then we have a person, the special envoy of the United Nations, Ambassador Nimitz, who was part of our journey to becoming a NATO member to achieve one of our strategic goals. And he is always helping North Macedonia achieving the second task and goal, which is the membership in the European Union. We have the first Minister of Foreign Affairs and first Ambassador to the United Nations, Professor Malevski. So if somebody can write the book about the first 30 years of North Macedonia, then I think that we have the persons on this table. We also have here representatives of the government, representatives of our diplomatic corps of the newer generation, but as well here we have the most prominent representatives of the non-governmental organizations in the country, which really fought the way for setting up and improving the citizens' rights in the past 30 years. And they also deserve a big credit for the country going forward in 3 decades and improving in any field. I know that we can always do better and we can always do more, but when we look 3 decades back, then I can say that we achieved a lot. And we achieved it together. Here we have generals of the United States Army that were helping us from the first day. We have diplomats serving in Skopje, in Belgrade, which as well supported our path towards a modern Republic of North Macedonia, member of NATO, and future member of the European Union. So I want to thank you all in the name of the government, in my name, and especially in the name of the citizens of the Republic of North Macedonia for everything what you have done for the country and for its citizens in the past, and what you will do in the future, as we know that here on the table are friends of our country. At the outset, I would like to underline that the admission to the United Nations 30 years ago represents a landmark event in the history of the Macedonian people and all citizens living in North Macedonia. Albanians, Turks, Serbs, Vlachs, Bosniaks, Roma, and all the others with whom we share this beautiful country. It has been the fulfillment of a dream of generations to live in a free, sovereign, and democratic state, firmly and soundly part of the family of the United Nations. I was just 18 years old at these historic days, and I remember the excitement and the enthusiasm of our whole nation in front of the new age. I said on the press conference after the meeting of the Security Council, where I had the pleasure to be the first Prime Minister to address the Security Council from our country, that at that time I was in the United States and I was studying here. And I was one of the first to see our country being part of the United Nations. Because it was May when I came to New York, 1993, and in April we became members of the United Nations. You know, this story is very interesting because I came to the United States with a Yugoslavian passport in 1992. And I was going back to Skopje, late 1993, and actually this was an expired, non-existing passport. So it was really a challenge to go through all the airports and borders and come back to Skopje. And and the first thing I did was to take a new Macedonian passport. I left the country with Yugoslavian dinars. I came back, and the last dollars which I earned in the United States I exchanged for the Macedonian dinar. So this is how I personally remember this 30 years ago. Nevertheless, we all became very soon aware that the peaceful gain independence is only the beginning of a long and a bumpy road for our country, and as yet no other country in the region, and I would say in Europe, we needed to make hard choices, hard decisions, but all of them proved to be right for the future of the country. Even more that the very fact that, unlike other republics of former Yugoslavia, we succeeded to achieve our independence in a peaceful manner, which was considered a miracle at that time. With the 30 years distance, I think that we can speak, if not about a miracle, then certainly about a kind of original Macedonian recipe for peace. The main ingredients of this peace, of this recipe, were quite simple. Some of them are enumerated in the title of this panel, Diplomacy in General, including the preventive one, mediation, and good neighborly policy. Add to this the political wisdom, tolerance, the culture of dialogue, and readiness for compromise, and you get the Macedonia's success story. Of course, it is easier said than to be done. The temptations to stray away were all around. In some other parts of former Yugoslavia, the efforts to succeed provoked strong nationalist waves that led to extreme violence, mass atrocities, and ethnic cleansing. The Macedonian path was completely different. Kiro Gligorov, our first president, wisely and skillfully guided the country together with his team at that time through all challenges and difficulties, combining the people's will for independence, clearly expressed at the referendum on the 8th of September 1991, with the patience, wisdom, and determination to avoid all traps to enter the vicious circle of confrontations and conflicts. Here, the decisions to invite and to host the first and only preventive UN mission was of crucial importance. The UNPREDEP mission, a wise and cautious move to prevent the spillover from the raging wars around, was the first and successful act of preventive diplomacy ever. Giving a full credit to the late President Gligorov, I am delighted to have here with us one of the principal associates of the President, the First Minister of Foreign Affairs in that period, Professor Denko Malevski, and I am sure he will reflect on these issues as well. He has told me how it all began and how the decisions were made, so I guess that he will share part of it together with this audience. The peacefully gained independence and avoidance of violence, although being tremendous achievements in the circumstances of war and conflicts that followed the demise of former Yugoslavia, were only the peak of an iceberg. The long journey for our right to exist started at that moment, actually. By joining the United Nations on April 8, 1993, a precedent was set in the history of the United Nations to have a country admitted to the organization under the provisional reference by which the country was addressed for 27 years. Under the auspices of the United Nations and the appointment of the Secretary General's two mediators, Cyrus Vance and Matthew Nimitz, who I'm so glad that he could join us here today and participate in this panel, the talks between Greece and our country began over the differences of the name issue, which was finally resolved through mediation with the signing of the Prespa Agreement in June 2018. For us, it was a hard and painful compromise. Nevertheless, in doing so, our country proved that by employing diplomacy and dialogue, understanding and tolerance, as well as by means of compromise, even the most difficult issues can be resolved and new perspectives of friendship and cooperation could be opened. In the same vein, during our 30 years United Nations membership, North Macedonia is gradually resolving the open issues with its neighbors by implementing a firm and steady policy of good neighborliness. Here I have to mention all the leaders of our country that made these tough decisions. I am the last one of them who is at this moment has the honor and the responsibility to lead the government, and being part of the negotiations last year for starting the negotiations and the screening process with the European Union, I can say that making decisions which are against 80% of the public opinion, which is guided by a creative hysteria by ones which do not want to see the country integrated in NATO and the European Union, is not an easy decision. And that's why I have to pay credit to all the leaders of our country, to Kirill Grigorov, to President Rajkovski, who was leading the Ohrid Framework Agreement, to prime ministers who were leading in the past the process of transition of our country. I have to pay respect as well to former Prime Minister Zoran Zaev, who took this courageous decision, because this is not an easy decision. You live with the decision all your life, but then you know that you have done something which creates better future for the generations of citizens of North Macedonia. And you have done a decision which makes the country secure within NATO and paved the road towards full European Union integration. For us, this, as I said, was a hard compromise. But nevertheless, in doing so, our country proved that by employing diplomacy and the dialogue, understanding and tolerance, as well as by means of compromise, even the most difficult issues can be solved and resolved, and new perspectives for friendship and cooperation could be opened. In the same vein, during these 30 years United Nations membership, North Macedonia is gradually resolving the open issues with its neighbors by implementing a firm and steady policy of good neighborliness. The maintenance of the spirit of good neighborliness and reinforced regional cooperation, the Open Balkan Initiative being only one example, the Berlin process being another example, remains one of the pillars of our foreign policy. Furthermore, North Macedonia is a serious regional actor in building and maintaining peace and good neighborly relations, and with the rich experience in creating models for resolving identity and other conflicts, can and will benefit United Nations institutions in the exercise of their competence in preventive diplomacy and conflict prevention, negotiation of conflicts, and post-conflict reconciliation. Dear Excellencies, dear friends, dear ambassadors, the principles on which North Macedonia conducts its foreign policy are an expression of the country's internal policy for building and maintaining a multicultural democracy and the permanent inclusiveness of diversity in democratic processes, protection and promotion of human rights and the rights of different ethnic communities and vulnerable groups, the culture of dialogue and compromises while insisting on prevention in resolving all disputes go hand in hand with our attachment to active and effective multilateralism. We care and contribute to strengthening of the security, democracy, and human rights, nationally, regionally, and globally, defining ourselves as a visible and active partner in the United Nations. On that path, for the past 3 decades, we have been creating partnership with many like-minded countries. We became member of NATO, finalizing the integration in the European Union, towards which we are investing dedicated efforts, will represent the completion of the long road that began with the referendum for independence back in 1991 and the subsequent admissions of our country to the United Nations 30 years ago. The path was not at all easy. It was a path full of self-restraints, persistence in supporting the stated principles and policies of peace, cooperation and friendship, as well as the determination to stand by them even in most difficult times. This 18-year-old boy and that whole generation of young Macedonians, in that time of our independence, stands together for the country of a modern, peaceful, democratic North Macedonia, to uphold the principles and values that enabled our establishment as a sovereign and independent state, enriched social cohesion of the society, and guarantee of our future development and progress in the family of nations. North Macedonia will undoubtedly continue to strengthen its position and become a more active peacemaking factor in the center's international politics, such as the Organization of the United Nations. In conclusion, I would like to thank the permanent mission of North Macedonia to the United Nations and personally Ambassador Ljubomir Prškovski, with his colleagues, General Consul in New York, his deputies here and assistants in the mission, our ambassador in Washington. And I also want to extend to all of them, because they are all seniors in our diplomacy, which are serving now in the United Nations, for being key figures in the first days of our independence, for organizing this event, and to all of you for your presence and your attention. Thank you very much.